Marcus Bennett kept his grip firm on the steering wheel, his knuckles white against the dark material. The gray pavement stretched forward, endless and unchanging. His shift began at dawn, a cycle defined by the constant rhythm of traffic lights and urgent drop-offs. By noon, his lower back pulsed with a dull, sharp ache that spread into his shoulders. He adjusted his position, but the seat offered no relief. The van stalled in a gridlock of idling engines and exhaust fumes that clouded the air. He checked the clock. Behind schedule again. He tapped his fingers against the rim of the wheel, the sound lost in the cacophony of horns. Every minute lost meant another delivery pushed into the late afternoon. He watched the digital numbers on the dashboard flicker, marking the slow, agonizing crawl of the day. The monotony felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. He reached for a water bottle, found it empty, and set it back down with a clatter. His eyes scanned the windshield, searching for a gap in the line of vehicles that simply did not exist. Another hour of this, another mile of the same gray road. He exhaled a long, steady breath, braced his feet against the floorboards, and waited for the light to change. Marcus parked the van at the curb, the engine ticking as it cooled. He stepped onto the pavement, the silence of the bookstore interior, a sharp contrast to the street noise. He walked past rows of shelves, the scent of paper and dust filling the air. His hand brushed against spines until he reached the self-improvement section. He pulled a tattered volume from the shelf, the cover worn at the edges. He flipped through the pages, his thumb stopping at a passage near the center. He read the words aloud, his voice low. "Successful people use spare moments productively while others waste them." He read it twice. He looked at the window, seeing his parked van through the glass. The sentence held his attention, cutting through the haze of his exhaustion. He stood there for a long minute, the weight of the book pressing against his palm. He did not put the book back immediately. He slid it into his side pocket, felt the solid weight of it against his leg, and turned toward the exit. The air outside felt different as he stepped back onto the street. He walked toward the van, his pace measured, the words from the page still cycling through his thoughts. He reached for the door handle, his fingers steady. Marcus climbed into the driver's seat, the familiar smell of stale air and vinyl greeting him. Beside him, in the adjoining cabin, a coworker tapped a screen, the blue light reflecting off his face. Marcus reached into his bag, pulled out a thick spiral-bound notebook, and placed it on the steering wheel. He picked up his phone, stared at the screen, and switched it off. He placed the device in the glove box and clicked it shut. The silence was absolute. He opened the notebook to a blank page, clicked his pen, and began to write. He focused on the mechanics of dividend investing, sketching out definitions and formulas in small, precise letters. Outside, the other drivers leaned back, eyes half closed, scrolling through endless feeds. Marcus did not look up. He traced the movement of capital on the page, calculating yields and reinvestment timelines. His pen moved in a steady, rhythmic cadence. He blocked out the chatter from the nearby cabs, creating a wall of focus. He treated the next 30 minutes as a rigorous classroom, ignoring the urge to check the time. He filled the first page, flipped it, and started on the next. The lunch break passed in a blur of ink and numbers. He closed the notebook, his hand cramping, and looked at the dashboard clock. It was time to return to the road. The delivery route became a blur of street signs and stoplights, but his mind remained on the page. As soon as the engine died, the truck transformed. Marcus spread his notes across the dashboard. He tackled compound interest, drawing jagged lines that spiked upward on the paper. He questioned the math until it made sense. When a concept regarding market volatility proved elusive, he dug through his bag, retrieving a secondary manual to cross-reference the data. He scribbled in the margins, creating a shorthand language of gains and losses. The cab grew hot, but he did not roll down the window. He needed the space for his charts. He mapped out the growth of hypothetical portfolios, noting how small, recurring investments behaved over 10, 20, and 30 years. He calculated the exact impact of reinvesting dividends. Watching the numbers swell on the page, his pen ink ran low, but he pressed harder, ensuring every digit was legible. He was no longer just reading. He was building a blueprint. He traced a circle around a projected total, his breath steady. The dashboard was covered in a grid of logic, a stark departure from his earlier days of aimless scrolling. He checked his watch, realized he had pushed 5 minutes past his break, and tucked the notebook away. He started the ignition, the notes now safely stowed, his mind already calculating the next day's variables. The Tuesday arrived with a gray, persistent drizzle that blurred the windshield. Marcus parked in his usual spot, but he did not reach for his notebook. Instead, he pulled his laptop from the passenger floorboard. He opened the brokerage portal, the white screen glowing against the dim interior of the cab. His heart rate ticked up, a steady, rhythmic thud against his ribs. He navigated to the ticker symbol he had analyzed for months. His modest savings, gathered from years of overtime and skipped lunches, sat in the account. He checked the total one final time. Every digit was burned into his memory. He navigated to the order screen. His finger hovered over the trackpad. The silence of the truck felt heavy, magnified by the sound of rain tapping on the roof. He clicked the buy button. A confirmation window popped up, asking him to verify the trade. He paused, his breath held, considering the reality of the capital shifting from safety into the volatility of the market. He clicked confirm. The screen refreshed. The funds were gone, replaced by the digital record of his first shares. He sat back, the air in the cab suddenly feeling thin. He refreshed the page again. The ticker moved. He was no longer just tracking numbers on a page. He was anchored to the market itself. He closed the laptop, his hands steady, and looked out at the rain. The account balance did not spike. It drifted upward, then gained traction. Marcus watched the ticker, but his attention shifted to the dividend alerts. When the first payment hit, he did not withdraw it. He funneled those cents back into the market. Watching the engine of compound interest begin to turn, each lunch break now served a dual purpose, monitoring his holdings and refining his own venture. He flipped back to the sketches he had drafted during the previous autumn. The ink smudged from months of handling. He pulled a new notebook from his bag, drafting the logistics for a side business. He mapped out service routes, supply costs, and potential margins on a clean page. By the time he finished his shift, the business plan was no longer a theory. He registered the entity from his phone in the cab, the screen casting a sharp light against the dashboard. He was no longer just a driver who studied. He was a driver who built. The momentum became tangible. He spent his breaks answering client emails and adjusting his operational strategy. His notebook filled with growth projections that eclipsed his modest salary. He worked with a new cadence, his movements faster, his decisions more precise. The silence of the truck was replaced by the hum of incoming business notifications. He had transitioned from a passive student of wealth to an active architect of his own time, and the trajectory of his life began to steepen rapidly. The cab door creaked open. A junior driver climbed in, his eyes immediately landing on the stack of financial journals resting on the center console. He shifted his gaze from the notebooks to the screen, then back to Marcus. The junior driver leaned in, pointing to a complex chart of compound interest projections. "How do you know all this?" he asked, his voice tinted with genuine bewilderment. Marcus did not look up immediately. He tapped his pen against the steering wheel, finishing a final calculation in his logbook. He put the pen down and closed the journal with a sharp, definitive snap. He turned to the junior driver, whose phone was already lighting up with a social media notification. Marcus gestured toward the distant, empty lunchroom visible through the window. "That is where it happened," Marcus replied. The junior driver frowned. Looking at the desolate, quiet room, he did not see the hundreds of hours of study, the early mornings, or the missed naps that had turned that space into a classroom. He saw only an empty break area. Marcus turned back to his work, his focus returning instantly to the numbers. He did not explain further. The gap between them was not intelligence, but the invisible labor of the hours everyone else chose to discard. The house was still. Outside, the world moved in a rhythm Marcus once knew intimately, but inside his office, the air held a heavy, deliberate silence. He sat at the desk, the glow from the laptop screen reflecting in his eyes. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He refreshed the brokerage page. A loading icon spun, then vanished. The numbers snapped into place. 7 digits. He blinked, but the figure remained fixed on the screen. He leaned back, the chair creaking in the stillness. He thought of the delivery routes, the constant roar of traffic, and the frantic pace of his earlier years. That noise felt like a memory from a different life. He did not shout. He did not jump. He simply watched the cursor blink next to the total. The weight of every 30-minute lunch break, every page of notes, and every disciplined choice compressed into that one numeric display. He had arrived. He took a slow breath, the silence of the room amplifying the profound shift in his reality. He was not looking at a lottery win or a windfall. He was looking at the sum of his own persistence. He reached out and clicked the browser shut, the screen fading to black. Marcus remained in the chair, his hands resting flat against the cool surface of the desk. He traced the path of the last few years in his mind. It was not a grand, singular event that led him here. It was a mosaic of fragmented 30-minute windows. He remembered the smell of the bookstore, the stiff binding of that first tattered manual, and the cramped, vibrating driver's seat where he had first scrawled notes on compound interest. Every one of those moments had been a brick in this foundation. He looked around the room, feeling the weight of the silence. It was no longer the silence of an empty house, but the quiet of a life reclaimed. He had taken time that others discarded and turned it into the bedrock of his future. He felt the tension leave his shoulders. There was no more chasing deadlines or racing against the clock. He had rewritten the trajectory of his days. A sense of profound peace settled over him. He was no longer a passenger to his own circumstances. Every digit on that screen represented a choice he had made, a lesson he had learned, and a sacrifice he had deemed worth the cost. The path ahead was clear, and for the first time, he owned every step of it. Marcus stood up, the chair pushing back against the floor with a rhythmic scrape. He looked at the closed laptop one last time. There was no need to check the numbers again. The work was done, and the foundation was set. He moved to the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Those lights represented thousands of people currently caught in the same cycle he had once endured. He reached over, clicked the power switch, and stood in the dim light for a moment. He began to organize his workspace for the morning. He placed his pens in the tray and aligned his notebooks. It was a small, systematic habit, the same discipline that had turned empty lunch breaks into a fortune. He did not seek to escape his history, but to honor the process that built his future. He walked toward the door, turning off the lamp as he passed. The room fell into shadows, yet he felt no darkness. He had proven that financial freedom was never a sudden windfall. It was the slow, steady accumulation of choices that others chose to ignore. He stepped out of the room ready for the next day, knowing exactly how to build whatever came next.